Naitwa Frida Kairodhi, kutoka Meru County, mahali inaitwa Giaki. Mimi nafanya ukulima wa mahindi na sorghum, na pia nafuga kuku, nafuga mbuzi. Hapa ni mashambani. Bila internet unaweza kuwa mbali sana na hii maisha ya kisasa, kwa sababu
मोबाइल ने हमारी लाइफ को चेंज करके रख दिया। हमने अपना सिलेबस भी मोबाइल इंटरनेट से मंगा के देखा और समझा सेकेंड ईयर का, और कोई भी टॉपिक अगर हमको नहीं समझ आता था तो हम लोग यूट्यूब पे जा कर के उस टॉपिक को समझते थे। और क्योंकि सर थे नहीं, कॉलेज बंद हो चुका था कोरोना के दौरान, तो मोबाइल ही हम लोगों की बहुत मदद किया। मोबाइल से हमने बहुत सारी स्किल्स को एक्सप्लोर किया, जैसे कि वीडियो एडिटिंग करना, वॉइस एडिटिंग करना, वीडियो मेकिंग करना। हमने बहुत सारे नए नए डिज़ाइंस बनाने सीखे, जैसे कि ऐप्स के माध्यम से, जैसे कैनवा एक ऐप है, वो सब चीज़ें हम लोगों ने एक्सप्लोर किया मोबाइल में ही।
COVID-19 තත්ත්වය ඇත්තටම අපේ ව්‍යාපාරවලට බොහොම නරක විදිහට බලපෑවා. මගේ ව්‍යාපාරයත් ඇත්තටම කඩේ වහන තත්ත්වයටම සිද්ධ වුණා. ඒ වුණාට මට ජංගම දුරකථන ක්‍රියාකරු හරහා ඇත්තටම මගේ ව්‍යාපාරයට ලොකු උදව්වක් ලැබුණා. මොකද මට ගෙදර ඉඳගෙන මම මගේ ව්‍යාපාරයේ ගේ ඇතුලේ ඉඳගෙන, ඒ කියන්නේ මට WhatsApp, එතකොට messages, අය වගේ phone.
Karena dengan adanya internet seluler serta banyaknya aplikasi yang mendukung kita untuk bisa berkomunikasi dengan keluarga kita yang jaraknya jauh, itu kita bisa melaksanakan seperti via chatting, via video call, serta masih banyak cara lainnya.
Alafu kwa samba, kuna wakati hii amewamu ilikuya ikavamia mtama wetu na pia mahindi, tukapiga picha kwa internet na tukaletewa ndawa।
তো পার্সোনালি আমার মনে হয় এই সময়টাতে আমার মোবাইল ইন্টারনেটটা আমাকে আমার জীবনটাকে অনেক পরিবর্তন করে দিয়েছে। আর আমি এখন হচ্ছে গিয়ে নিজের লাইফের ক্ষেত্রেও মোবাইল ইন্টারনেটটাকে কাজে লাগাচ্ছি। কিভাবে? তো খাবার দাবার তৈরি করার সময় আমি কিছু ইউটিউব থেকে উপকরণগুলো দেখে আমার কাজের সুবিধা করতে আমি যেন ঠিকঠাকভাবে মেনুটা তৈরি করতে পারি, তো আমি ইউটিউবের হেল্প নিই।
Wakati wa corona mamangu alikuwa mgonjwa, na tukapata go through the internet, tukapata online doctor na tukapata kumtibu na akapata nafuu. Mimi kama mfanyi biashara, kasi internet sijui saa hii ningekuwa wapi, juu imenisaidia sana. Kiki zangu ziko sawa, hata mapishi yangu iko sawa.
दुनिया मुट्ठी में, अगर आपके पास मोबाइल है तो पूरी दुनिया को बदल सकते हैं, दुनिया से कनेक्ट कर सकते हैं।
Kuwa na internet imekuwa imenisaidia sana kama mkulima. Tuseme wakati wa mvua inakuwa ujui, tuseme mvua itanyesha lini, lakini tuseme ulikuwa umeandika hata kama ni mahindi yako nje ama ni mtama, unaingia kwa hizo apps za weather, unasoma, unajua tuseme saa fulani itanyesha. Kama ulikuwa na kitu nje unaweza niweka kwa nyumba. Sasa imekuwa imetusaidia tu sana. Mimi naitwa Frida, niko hapa Meru na ninaweza connect na ulimwengu mzima thanks to internet.
It's such an uplifting video, seeing how mobile internet is transforming the lives of women like Kavita with her studies in India and Frida with her farm in Kenya. But the sad news is that there are hundreds of millions of women who still don't have access to mobile internet in low and middle income countries, and far more women than men. And this is what we call the mobile gender gap, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. We've been working on this issue at the GSMA now for about 15 years, and we're delighted to be launching our latest edition of our Mobile Gender Gap report today. I'm Dominica Lindsay, I'm Senior Director on the Connected Women team, and I'm joining from London today. A big welcome to you all to our launch event. It's great to have so many of you joining from all over the world, so please do share in the chat where you're based. It would be lovely to hear from you. So today we're going to be sharing with you our latest data on the mobile gender gap and talking about things such as how big is this gap today? Is it getting better or worse, and how can we get rid of it? For the last couple of launch events, we haven't had great news to share with you all, but I'm really pleased to say that this year there are some tentative good news signs, and you'll hear more about this in a bit. This gap is a really tough problem to solve. We're really grateful to all the many partners who we've had the pleasure of working with on this journey, and many of you are listening today. So a big shout out to you all. And we're also here, and also a huge thank you to our funders who have made all of this possible: the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and the Swedish International Development Corporation Agency. And we're also hugely grateful to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who contributed to this research. So first up, I'd like to give the floor to Mats Granryd, our Director General at the GSMA, to say a few words. Over to you, Mats.
Thank you, Dominika. It is fantastic to be here to launch this year's Mobile Gender Gap Report. At the GSMA, we've been tracking the mobile gender gap across low and middle income countries since 2017. And this is one of the most important reports we produce, because we all know that what gets measured gets done. So for me, there are three key reasons why it is so important to close the mobile gender gap. The first is empowerment. When women have access to a mobile phone and services, they have the chance to transform their lives, their families, and the community around them. Number two, economies. Closing the mobile gender gap in low and middle income countries could deliver up to $230 billion in additional revenues to the mobile industry and spur the GDP growth. And thirdly, enabling the SDGs. In 2015, the world committed to the SDGs, and closing the mobile gender gap is one of the best ways to ensuring that we reach these goals. If we're going to achieve them, we simply cannot afford to leave anyone behind. Now, last year, we didn't have very good news to share about the gender gap in mobile internet. Sadly, there were no changes. But today, I am pleased to say that we do have some good news. So the mobile internet gender gap has started to narrow from 19% in 2022 to 15% in 2023. And that just shows the power of working together. So today is a day to celebrate. But we also have to make sure that we don't lose focus, because this gap is still significant. Over 265 million fewer women than men are using mobile internet in low and middle income countries. And we need to target action from a range of stakeholders to solve this challenge. For many years now, we have worked with operators as part of the GSMA Connected Women Commitment Initiative to drive digital and financial inclusion for women, with some really impressive results. Today, over 50 operators have made formal commitments to reach more women with mobile internet and mobile money services. And since 2016, they have actually reached over 70 million additional women. Quite an achievement. At MWC in Barcelona this year, it was really inspiring to see our partners double down on their efforts, with 22 operators across Africa and Asia who made or renewed their commitments to the initiative beyond 2024. And this includes operators who are in 6 of the countries with the largest number of unconnected women. That is powerful stuff. Now, it's great that we have mobile operators on board, but as I said, closing the mobile gender gap is going to need targeted action from many stakeholders. And the GSMA, we're also working hard to support governments by sharing our expertise and data to help develop evidence-based policies to address the mobile gender gap. The challenge that lies ahead is a big one, too big for any organization to solve on its own. But I know that by working together, we have a fighting chance at achieving SDG number 5, achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls. So today we have an exciting lineup of speakers to share more on our latest data and what they are doing to address this persistent mobile gender gap. So let me hand back over to Dominika to get this show on the road. So Dominika, back to you.
Thank you, Mats, for kicking us off today and helping us appreciate the importance of this topic. Next up, I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Nadia Jeffrey, Insights Manager and lead author of this year's Mobile Gender Gap Report. She'll be taking us through the key findings. And if you have any questions for Nadia and our team, please feel free to use the chat box throughout today, and we will try our best to answer them in the chat. Over to you, Nadia.
Thank you for joining our session today. I'm Nadia Jeffrey, and I'm going to be sharing with you the key findings from our 2024 Mobile Gender Gap Report. So the Mobile Gender Gap Report series is an annual report that we've been publishing for the last 7 years, enabling us to comment on trends in the gender gap across low and middle income countries, or LMICs. The findings in our latest and previous reports are drawn primarily from the GSMA Consumer Survey and is supplemented by other third-party data. But this nationally representative survey has been conducted face-to-face each year since 2017, with the most recent survey covering 12 LMICs at the end of 2023. It's gathered critical data on the mobile gender gap and allows us to continue monitoring women's access and use of mobile and how this compares to men. So from 2017, the gender gap in mobile internet adoption was consistently narrowing up to 2020 when it stood at 15%. This was, of course, good news. However, last year on International Women's Day, we shared that for the second year in a row, there had been a slowdown in digital inclusion for women, and that once again, progress in reducing the mobile internet gender gap had stalled. After those years of progress, women were being disproportionately negatively impacted in the immediate aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the mobile internet gender gap widened to 19% in 2022. Our latest data shows that the mobile internet gender gap in LMICs narrowed from that 19% to 15% in 2023, meaning women are now 15% less likely than men to use it. This reduction was due to women adopting mobile internet at a faster rate than men. In fact, in 2023, fewer men started using it compared to 2022, but there was an increase in the rate of adoption by women. The gender gap is now back to where it was in 2020. This recent narrowing represents a promising shift, and this is especially in comparison to the previous 2 years. But it's not yet clear if women's rate of adoption will continue to increase and whether the mobile internet gender gap will continue to narrow. And this gap is also still very wide, with 265 million fewer women than men using mobile internet in LMICs. So that recent reduction in the gender gap in mobile internet adoption across LMICs has been driven primarily by South Asia, where it decreased from 41% in 2022 to 31% in 2023. The gender gap in Sub-Saharan Africa also narrowed somewhat from 36% to 32% in 2023. But it's not significantly lower from what it was in 2017, which was 34%. And as you can see, the mobile internet gender gap is much lower in the other regions, where it has also remained relatively unchanged. So although we have seen some promising signs over the last year, especially in South Asia, there is still a substantial gap in mobile internet adoption across LMICs, with 66% of women in these countries using mobile internet now. And this is more women than ever before, but it is still much lower than men, 78% of whom now use it across LMICs. And there are significant regional variations in this gender gap in the total number of women who still do not use mobile internet. So the biggest gaps in mobile internet adoption continue to be in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, where the gender gaps are 31% and 32% respectively. And this is compared to a gender gap of 0% in Latin America and the Caribbean. Of the 785 million women across LMICs who do not use mobile internet, the majority, almost 60%, live in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. There are also some large gender gaps that persist throughout the mobile internet user journey. So we use this simple framework to understand what is preventing women from owning a mobile phone all the way through to using mobile internet regularly and accessing its full potential. And the gender gap tends to widen at each stage of this journey. So the gender gap in mobile ownership of any type of handset is 8% across LMICs. And this figure has been similar for a number of years, highlighting that those who still do not have a mobile phone are proving difficult to reach. But it's also important to look at what type of handset people own, as smartphone owners are significantly more likely to use mobile internet. But women still own typically more basic handsets than men and are 13% less likely to own a smartphone, a gender gap that has narrowed slightly between 2022 and 2023. If we move now to awareness of mobile internet, women are still less likely than men to be aware of it. However, awareness levels are relatively high, with over 80% of men and women aware of it in most survey countries. However, mobile internet awareness does not always translate into adoption, and there are many people, particularly women, who are aware of mobile internet but don't use it, suggesting that there are other barriers preventing them from doing so. And despite that narrowing in 2023 of the mobile internet gender gap that I discussed, this gender gap is still high at 15%. And beyond just mobile internet adoption, it's also important to compare how regularly women and men use mobile internet and whether it's meeting their life needs to the same extent. And despite that persistent gender gap in adoption in most survey countries, once men and women become mobile internet users, the vast majority tend to use it every day. But most of these daily users, especially women, only use it for a limited range of purposes. We cannot forget to address the gender gap in mobile use, especially given this year we found that women who use mobile internet were more likely than men to report that they would like to use it more than they currently do. And this was true for more than half of female mobile internet users in Ethiopia, Kenya, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. So in order to tackle these gaps, it's essential to understand what stops women and men from adopting and using mobile internet. Across countries, our research found that once women are aware of mobile internet, they said the top barriers preventing them from adopting it are affordability, primarily of internet-enabled handsets, and a lack of literacy in digital skills. These are the same barriers for men, but millions more women face these barriers because they are much more likely to be offline. Women also tend to experience these barriers more acutely due to social norms and structural inequalities, including disparities in education and income. This year, for the first time, we also asked men and women who already use mobile internet what stops them from using it more. We found that across our survey countries, the top reported barriers to further use were not as clear-cut as the barriers to adoption, and they varied more by country. However, overall, safety and security concerns was the top reported barrier preventing men and women who use mobile internet from using it more. And this was in fact one of the top 3 reported barriers for women mobile internet users in all our survey countries and for men in almost all. These concerns included those related to reliability of information found online, scams or fraud, information security, unwanted contact from strangers, and fears of being exposed to harmful content. And these were concerns that were particularly prevalent in Mexico, Guatemala, Indonesia, and India. For example, 50% of women and 45% of men who use mobile internet in Indonesia reported safety and security concerns as the main reason they don't use it more. Further research in our 12 survey countries that features in the Mobile Gender Gap report suggests that the magnitude of these concerns is more widespread than the actual prevalence of the negative experiences when using mobile internet for men or for women. Nevertheless, these concerns are still extremely important to address to ensure that people aren't deterred from accessing mobile internet, but also that they feel confident they can keep themselves safe whilst using it. The second reported barrier to further mobile internet use is affordability, and this is primarily of data, but also of handsets. And it's important to note that handsets and data are already less affordable for women than men due to issues such as the gender pay gap and also women's lower employment rates. Addressing these barriers is a challenge, and that's especially in the context of today with high inflation, climate crises, and geopolitical shocks affecting entire populations. However, the potential socioeconomic benefits of doing so are substantial. Closing the mobile gender gap will have a positive impact on women users. It will benefit society, industry, and economies more broadly, as well as contributing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, including those related to education, health, poverty reduction, and of course, gender equality. So what can stakeholders do to address the mobile gender gap? Our full report does provide more specific recommendations for different stakeholders, but here are 4 high-level actions to consider. Firstly, to ensure that there is a focus on gender equality and reaching women at the organizational and policy level through senior leaders championing the issue and setting gender-specific targets. An example of this is our Connected Women Commitment Initiative, where since 2016, more than 50 operators have set formal targets to increase the proportion of women in their customer base. They've now collectively reached over 70 million additional women with mobile internet and mobile money services. Gender disaggregated data is also crucial. It's crucial for measuring the gender gap and informing investments and action to address it. While our survey does fill an important data gap, much more data is needed to understand women's mobile use, their needs, and the barriers they face, especially in different contexts and among specific groups. When it comes to designing and implementing mobile-related products, services, policies, and initiatives, stakeholders should ensure that women's needs, circumstances, and challenges are explicitly addressed. And this includes the key barriers faced by women, but also the consideration of social norms that can contribute to women experiencing these barriers more acutely than men. A couple of examples when it comes to two of the barriers mentioned earlier: affordability. So this could be improved by policies and initiatives that lower the upfront cost of mobile handsets, particularly internet-enabled handsets, which has the potential to disproportionately benefit women. This could be through lowering mobile-specific taxes or handset financing initiatives. And then literacy and digital skills. An example could be mobile operators, policymakers, the development community, and others investing in mobile digital skills training that purposefully target women as well as men to increase their digital literacy and confidence levels. And finally, collaborate and partner with different stakeholders to address the mobile gender gap, as the barriers women face are complex and they are interrelated. So it is yet to be determined whether mobile gender gaps continue to narrow, but it will require informed, targeted action from industry, policymakers, development community, and other stakeholders in order to do so. In a world that's becoming more digitized, it's essential that women are not left behind. If you want to know more, you can read the full report, which is out today. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Nadia, for taking us through the key findings. And also a huge thank you to everyone else at the GSMA who was involved in the report or this launch, including Jacob, Calvin, Ananomi, Claire, Rosie, Orla, Matt, Pippa, Gagandeep, and Jackie. Also our research partner, Ipsos, and of course the men and women in the field who kindly agreed to be interviewed. We only had time today to share some of the findings, but we do have data from 12 countries in the report. So I'd really encourage you to have a read. Perhaps somebody from my team could kindly put the 12 countries in the chat. And in particular, I would really encourage you to have a look at figure 13, where for the first time, we are able to show for each country the most important barriers women said were stopping them from adopting and using mobile internet as a proportion of the total population in that country. And we also have this for men. So for each country, you can see where we all might want to prioritize our efforts. So next up, I'm delighted to hand over to Claire Sibthorpe, head of our digital inclusion team, who is going to be asking Doreen Bogdan-Martin to share her thoughts on our report. And Doreen is Secretary General of the ITU and a great friend of our programme. Over to you, Claire.
Hi, Doreen. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. And we're glad that and yeah, just glad to have you back to discuss the findings from this year's report. And I'm going to kick off with my first question, which is I was wondering if there was anything in this year's report that surprised you.
Great question. And, let me say, Claire, I'm happy to be back with you for this. And really a big congratulations to you and the GSMA team for this report. I would say what surprised me positively so, or pleasantly so, is that the gap finally is starting to narrow a bit. I think that's good news. We'd like to see more progress, but at least we're moving in the right direction. I think that stagnation that you and I have spoken about for years was definitely a worrying trend. And so I think my first reaction would be one of excitement and some relief. And I think it's actually something to celebrate, given that the world is backsliding on so many of the SDGs, including SDG 5, which is all about gender equality. I think, though, Claire, that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think I'm always surprised that some people continue to believe that the internet is not as important for women as it is for men. And I recall when we were together in Barcelona at the Women's Leadership Roundtable, one of the speakers was actually talking about delivering a group of to a group of women mobile devices to a rural community, and that they had gone back a year later, the donors that had provided those mobile devices, and they found out that all the devices had actually been given to husbands, fathers, brothers, and cousins. And I think that, of course, is most unfortunate. Maybe it's an example of discrimination that women face when it comes to not just accessing, but also being able to thrive in a digital world where women remain still largely underrepresented, especially in the tech workforce. And I think we have to, as we look further and we want to have more progress even for next year, we also have to find ways to tackle some of those cultural barriers. We have to find ways to tackle some of the other issues linked to affordability, linked to online safety, and also linked to digital skills, because these are some of the impediments that actually keep women offline. So we have to find ways to tackle those issues. And I guess just one other point to mention, Claire, in our work, of course, we have our ITU facts and figures, and we were doing something for landlocked developing countries. And I think when it comes to landlocked, least developed countries, I think that there is still a challenge that remains. And we still see a significant digital gender gap. And it's actually increased by 3 percentage points since 2019, if we look back to then. And so that's a gap in a specific group of countries that we still need to tackle.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. And thanks for highlighting just sort of some of the challenges that we still have to go. As you said, there's some slightly positive news story, but there's still a lot of women who are not online. And we're still only back to where we were in 2020 in terms of the mobile internet gender gap. So you mentioned a few things that are, that we need to focus on, but I was wondering, what do you think we can do to really make sure that this trend continues? It was obviously, it feels a bit fragile to me that, the gap widened and now it's back to where it was in 2020. How do we make sure that this reducing trend continues?
I think that's a great question. And I think, Claire, we can't be complacent. We can't sort of declare victory, because we're definitely not there yet. The progress is encouraging, but we need to basically keep the attention on the digital gender gap. And that means the infrastructure investment piece, because it's not there universally. It means also the device affordability piece, which I mentioned before, the skills. We find that women and girls are less likely to have the needed digital skills. And I would also add, like, cyber safety skills. We need to also zoom in on online protection, as women and girls are more often subject to online harassment and bullying. So I think we need to tackle all of those issues, and we need to do it through things like our Equals partnership, through things like our Partner to Connect coalition, which is focused on connecting the hardest to connect. I was trying to think of some examples for our chat, and I was thinking about an initiative that we recognized in the context of Equals, and it was a woman in Colombia. Her name is Luz Nelcy Rodriguez, and she cultivates passion fruit, cocoa beans, and oranges on a farm on land that she inherited from her father in a small village. And of course, that land is her pride, and she really wanted to try to grow her business. and she needed a loan for that business. And so she went to a local branch of BBVA, the Microfinance Foundation, and she was able to secure a loan. And through digital finance, having access to technology, through training and support that she got through the BBVA program, she was able to repay her loan, but she was also able to support her family and grow her business. And I think it's examples like that we need to keep in sight if we're going to continue to progress and really close the digital gender gap. And I would also just add, Claire, that when it comes to next year, we have an incredible opportunity with the Beijing Plus 20 review. I think that's a moment to bring global attention to that issue. We also have the ITU anniversary celebration on the 17th of May next year, where ITU will be 160 years old. And we're also focused on the gender gap. And so bringing those two opportunities together and zooming in on concrete solutions and actions that can close the gap, I think will ensure that we move together sustainably.
Great. Thanks for highlighting the importance of the sort of addressing all the barriers, but also bringing some practical examples of how, positive news of how we could do it, and importance of highlighting this as an issue. We don't have a ton of time today, so I just was wondering, you've been working on this for a very long time and a real leader in this space, very inspirational. If you just had one piece of advice for this audience, you talked about a lot of different things that we can be doing, but if you had one piece of advice, what do you think it would be?
One piece of advice. I would say bring more young people, more young voices to the table. We need those experiences. We need to understand their needs. And so let's engage with young women and girls and ensure that we are able to give them the digital opportunities that can help empower and fulfill them.
Thanks. That's a great piece of advice. Thank you so much, Doreen, for your time today and for being such a supporter of this issue and really driving work forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you and congratulations, and always grateful for the strong partnership, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Doreen, for being part of our launch today and sharing your perspective, and also for reminding us how important it is to tackle the mobile gender gap and how in certain parts of the world this gap can be even higher. We're going to move now to South Asia, a region where the mobile gender gap has been quite wide, but with a lot of change. And more specifically, we're going to zoom in on India, where the gender gap in mobile internet narrowed more over the last year than any other country in our survey. I have great pleasure in welcoming Vishakha Sehgal from Reliance Jio in India, who is Vice President and Head of Strategic Initiatives. Jio is one of our operator commitment partners who we are very proud to work with over the years. And as part of our Connected Women Commitment Initiative, they have a formal commitment to increase the proportion of women in their mobile internet customer base in India. And they've been working really hard to achieve this goal. I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague, Gagandeep Manchanda, our Senior Market Engagement Manager in Asia, who will be asking Vishakha about what Jio has been doing.
Hi Vishakha, it's great to be speaking to you and thank you for joining us today to share your reaction to the report's finding. As you've heard, the gender gap in mobile internet adoption across low and middle income countries have narrowed for the first time since 2020 and was driven primarily by women's increased adoption in South Asia. In India specifically, we've seen tremendous acceleration in digital adoption among women over the last year, with the gender gap in mobile internet narrowing from 40% in 2022 to 30% in 2023. We know that Jio has been working tirelessly to address the mobile gender gap in India for a number of years now. Why is this an important issue for Jio to address? And can you tell us about what you've been doing?
Thank you, Gagan. It's a pleasure to join you for the launch of this year's Mobile Gender Gap Report. being a partner for GSMA's Connected Women program. We eagerly await the insights from this report as they help us get a deeper sense on the gaps that we still need to plug in order to achieve digital gender parity in the true sense. So congratulations to GSMA on the report launch. Now, coming to your question and to put things into perspective, from a digital growth standpoint, last 1 year has been exceptionally significant for India. With the incredibly fast and extensive rollout of 5G infrastructure across the country, we witnessed massive surge in digital adoption. Jio has been at the forefront of this digital advancement. In the last 1 year or so, the data consumption levels on our Jio network have skyrocketed to, actually unprecedented levels. In fact, the current monthly per capita data usage of around 28.7 GB on our network is unmatched globally. And Gagan, what is really, what's been really heartening is to see the extraordinary growth and uptake from rural parts of India. The fact that in 2023, rural India accounted for over 53% of total internet usage base in India is a testimony to the narrowing digital divide in the country. Now, specifically talking about the digital gender gap, I'm extremely glad and honestly quite relieved that as a country, we managed to do a lot better on the gender gap index compared to last year. Going by a report from 2022 to 2023, there has been a 10% decline in the digital gender gap. This is quite remarkable, I would say, and I'm very confident that we will continue to build on these gains going forward as well. As far as Jio is concerned, advancing digital gender equality has always been a priority for us. We understand the implications of digital gender gap, especially in the current times when both social and financial inclusion necessitate digital access. From last so many years now, we've been consciously working to address the barriers for digital adoption, especially amongst women and marginalized segments. And if you ask me, we've always taken a 360-degree approach towards this. On the access front, we have endeavored to provide the most widespread and most affordable broadband access in the country. When it comes to device affordability, which is again one of the topmost barriers for digital adoption for women, we have constantly strived to innovate and create an ecosystem of affordable India-specific devices. Our Jio phone has been a game changer, and now the Jio Bharat phone, which was launched last year, is yet another revolutionary 4G feature phone that is available at a price point of just rupees 999, and it has some of the most compelling features, including support for UPI payments. In recent times, we also focused our efforts on addressing the usage gap, which we found was profoundly higher in women. We are working on large-scale digital skills training program for women. We are innovating on application side by leveraging transformative technologies like AI, NLP, IoT to create locally relevant digital applications, especially in areas like health, agriculture, education, which resonate with women and rural communities. And we are also adapting most of our digital offerings in various regional languages to drive further adoption and uptake. And last but not the least, I would like to mention and acknowledge our strategic partners, both GSMA and USAID. They have immensely supported us in our journey and have made invaluable contribution in our digital gender gap initiatives.
Oh, that's wonderful, Vishakha. Like we've been following Geo stories all around and, quote many examples all across the world. Now you've mentioned, you've been doing a lot of work around this. So my next question is around, the work you're doing. I like to, so there are a number of barriers women face, to using mobile internet in India. For instance, in our survey, women report a lack of mobile internet awareness, literacy and digital skills, safety and security concerns, and affordability as the key reason they do not use it. Now, we are aware that Jio has been working to address some of these barriers and have particularly amplified its focus on digital skills training. What are the main learnings of your work to tackle barriers for women face?
Gagan, frankly, quite early on in our digital journey, we had recognized the need to address the digital skills barrier, which we felt was preventing millions of Indians, especially women from rural communities, from accessing mobile-based digital services. And in that endeavor, we had engaged with some of our partners for digital skills early on. Unfortunately, while their training toolkits were good, we realized that they were not relevant for Indian audiences. The content was not resonating with the base that we were targeting. Unlike other countries, India is very diverse in terms of languages, dialect, and other nuances. In fact, what works in a state like Uttar Pradesh will not work in a southern state like Tamil Nadu. That is when we embarked on the digital skills program with GSMA with the objective of creating India-specific toolkits. These toolkits were designed post extensive field research, and a lot of credit goes to GSMA and the research partners for this. In fact, even the learning pathways, as you are aware, were selected after accessing the actual need gaps and priorities of women and marginalized segments. One of the very important learnings that we got from our landscaping and research phase was that just like location, need gaps also vary as per gender. We found that women tend to prioritize needs which are socially acceptable, such as home and lifestyle, children's education, and so on. So this was crucial input for us while selecting the training use cases. Once the initial set of modules were ready, there was extensive pilot testing conducted across 4 states, basis which the toolkits were further refined and fine-tuned. In fact, post the pilot, we actually added an additional video module for generic mobile handling skills. As you know, during the landscape phase, we realized that women from rural communities were not even familiar with basic mobile features. The digital skills program was finally rolled out at a national level last year. During phase 1, we covered over 13 states across India, leveraging Hindi, English, and Tamil as language mediums. We've already reached out to close to 100 million Indians, leveraging different channels for dissemination, like our extensive Jio store network, our foundations network of self-help groups for in-person training of women, and of course, digital channels targeting low or limited digital skill users. And now with the help of our Reliance Foundation, we've adapted these training modules into 9 additional regional languages. And very soon we'll be rolling out the program across 10 more states. And so far, we are very happy with the program uptake and response that we are getting. We are already seeing an uptick in adoption levels from women. Of course, once the phase 2 is complete, we'll do a more in-depth assessment in terms of the impact. But we are very confident that this program will have the desired impact in narrowing the prevalent usage gap and in bringing more women online.
Absolutely. I think this is one of our favorite topics. We can go on and on, but our time is running out. So I'm going to move to our last question. So our latest data highlights that more needs to be done across low and middle income countries to accelerate digital inclusion for women. As a final reflection, based on your experience, what are 1 or 2 significant actions which we can take to address mobile gender gap?
Gagan, if you look at the digital gender gap, it actually tends to widen and amplify at each leg of the mobile internet journey. So right from mobile ownership to mobile awareness to basic mobile broadband to more regular and more diverse usage of internet, the gap actually widens at every stage. So I firmly believe that we will always require a multi-pronged approach to address the barriers at each state of internet journey for women. However, from an India standpoint, I feel that handset affordability and digital literacy are 2 very significant barriers which still continue to disproportionately impact women and girls. So if I have to pick the top thrust areas, then it would definitely be expanding the ecosystem for affordable handsets, and B, greater focus on digital skill training. I think collective rigor in both these areas can result in significant gains from a digital gender equality standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you, Vishaka, for being with us and sharing your views with our audience, and most importantly, for your support in bringing the gender gap down in India. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Gagan. Thank you.
Thank you, Gagandeep and Vishaka. Vishaka, it was especially interesting to hear how you're scaling your digital skills training for women in India, and in particular, how you've been using in-person channels like self-help groups. And considering women's needs and preferences, you talked about regional languages and socially acceptable uses of the internet like home and lifestyle. So thank you for that. Now we're going to turn to Uganda, and I'm delighted to Sylvia Malinge, CEO of MTN Uganda. It was great to see Sylvia at MWC Barcelona, where she signed a Connected Women commitment to increase the proportion of women in the mobile internet customer base of MTN Uganda to 50%. My colleague Jackie Mabor, our Senior Market Engagement Manager in Africa, will be asking Sylvia about what MTN has been doing.
Sylvia, thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, let's start with some good news. We are pleased to report that the gender gap in Sub-Saharan Africa has narrowed slightly. It was 36% in 2022. It is now 32% in 2023. This is the first time that we are seeing a reduction in the gender gap in 5 years, with the closest being 34% in 2017. The GSMA research shows that affordability of handsets is a very important reason for this gap. So, what are you seeing in this context in Uganda and other African countries? And what are the key considerations you'd like to flag from a Ugandan perspective on both the gender gap and affordability of handsets?
So, Jackie, thanks a lot for having me. Really pleased to be here. So, yes, we are happy that there's progress, but I guess, as my boss likes to say all the time, we are happy, but we're not satisfied. Because I think the gap, as you've called out, is still pretty significant. It's not anything that we can be proud of, especially in this day and age where digital literacy, digital inclusions have almost become a basic human need for everybody to be able to have access to. And what we find is that it's women as well as young girls who are increasingly getting excluded, who are getting left out. I think the COVID period actually really demonstrated the impact of not being digitally included could have on access to basic things like education, access to financial services, access to healthcare, digital literacy, and therefore it's imperative that we scale and address this in a much more intentional and deliberate manner to make sure that we reduce and completely eliminate this gap that is there today. One of the biggest things, of course, is the price of handsets. Affordability is critical when you look at the amounts of income that many people are living on today versus the average cost of your entry-level smartphone device. Right now, the cheapest smartphone devices, you probably get them in the ranges of $40 to $50. It's still quite a big barrier for many people, especially women and girls, to be able to access. You'll find that in many households, they probably only have access to one device, and most of the time it's often owned by a man. So even if a woman wants to get access to financial services, she has to use her husband's credentials. He's the one who keeps the phone. And these are the things that have plagued that for a long period of time. And sometimes even as we have moved ahead in terms of modernizing our views and attitudes in the world, as the world has become a lot more connected, we still find that some of these challenges are still there in the societies and the countries that we come from. So addressing affordability is an imperative. So there's a lot of work that is being done by telcos. across the world to see how can we lower the cost of entry-level devices, especially looking at the price of components, looking at economies of scale in terms of getting these devices being produced in a larger scale. Programs such as device financing that we have been working on here in MTN are imperative because it allows a customer for as low as 20 US cents to begin to get access to a device where they pay a deposit for the device upfront, and then progressively over a period that is agreed, they pay back for the cost of the device, which allows them to be able to get immediate access to the device, begin to use it to create some economic value for themselves as they generate incomes that they then use then to be able to repay that cost of the device. But once you get the device in their hands, what then do they do with it? And that's where digital literacy comes in.
Thanks, Hilda. So that's absolutely fantastic. So let's, narrow down on Uganda's gender gap. So Uganda actually has a significant gender gap in mobile internet adoption. 21% of women are using mobile internet compared to 40% of men in Uganda. So first of all, it has been fantastic to see MTN Uganda pledge to increase the proportion of women in your customer base who use mobile internet to 50% by 2027. And this is part of GSMA's Connected Women Commitment Initiative. So you have already, spoken quite a lot about women's financial inclusion and, overall. But could we then, share more about what you're doing specifically looking at women's digital inclusion in Uganda?
So the commitment that we made in Barcelona this year is a commitment that we are working and intentionally solving for. Growing that penetration to 50% by 2027 is not an easy thing, but it's also an easy thing when you put your mind to it and allocate resources and people who continuously are looking at the problem, staring at it and asking, what are we doing today to be able to solve for it? Now, I have referenced the work that we are doing around device financing and how now we want to create a lot more inclusivity is by making sure that we are targeting community groups that are represented by women and young people so that you make sure that the efforts that you're putting in place in terms of not only, first of all, getting an affordable device, lowering the cost that probably customers have to deposit to be able to get access to the device, but also being very deliberate about the audiences that you're targeting, how you're reaching them, who are the partners that you're working with on the ground to help you be able to reach those women. Then that becomes critical to making sure that they're able to get access to the technology. So through our foundation, we are offering digital literacy training and educational programs that are targeted at women with a very deliberate intention of making sure that we're equipping them with the skills and the confidence that they need to be able to use mobile internet. I was in the northern part of Uganda about a couple of months ago. And it was interesting to be able to go into the community and actually see, we have a mobile internet bus that goes across Uganda. I think every year we're probably touching, is it 20 or 30,000? I can't remember the exact number. But we basically go into communities. The mobile internet bus is kitted with computers. And the majority of the people who were inside that bus were women. They were lining up. They were queuing up. We're in a community like 2 or 3 days. They're skilled in terms of basic digital literacy skills. How do you access the internet? What can you do with it? What do you do with YouTube? But also, I think with the advent of social media, TikTok, WhatsApp, it's becoming a lot more easier because people have learned to use it for their own personal networking. But I guess now the question is to ask, if I want to kit you in terms of setting up your business, how do you set up an email? How do you go online to create awareness about the products and services that you're doing? How do you use the internet to be able to get access to education and see what's happening in the rest of the world that you can then be able to customize and create opportunities for you and your family or you and your community? So these are the things that we are also now beginning to increasingly look at. And I think as you create excitement, when people realize what the mobile internet can be able to do for them, that awareness and that higher literacy then will drive a lot more participation, and that participation then is what will help us then to close some of these gaps that we see today.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. And it's amazing to see all the initiatives that MTN is doing. So for our final question, if you had to pick, what would you say is the one most impactful action that can be done to close the mobile gender gap?
I mean, there are many things that need to be done, and I think we all need to be aware, and probably that's the work that the GSMA is doing, and really commend you for that, for bringing people who are like-minded in terms of having a common view of how we kind of want to reset, if I may say so, the world, and some of the statistics that we are seeing. So it requires many actors in this whole chain to be able to create this change. And therefore, a multifaceted approach is critical. We need a lot of allies in this whole conversation to actually bring the change that we would want to see. But I think if there's one thing that we think will probably accelerate the pace of that change, is just creating the appetite for and the awareness of the transformative impact of what mobile internet can be able to do. The beautiful thing I think about the continent is that we have more than 50% of the population being young. So many of them are digital natives. They were born in the digital era, and therefore for them, it's not anything that is unfamiliar. All they need is access if we create the opportunities and remove the barriers that prevent them from participating. So I think the one thing that probably can create that level of excitement is around driving digital literacy, as I spoke to, because when people become aware of the transformative impact that this can have on them as individuals, on their families, on their communities, then there'll be a lot more agitation, even with governments, to remove the barriers that prevent them from participating. I think the more we drive digital literacy programs that are comprehensive, not only just looking at technical skills, but also on the broader aspects of things like driving digital citizenship, critical thinking, using digital literacy to drive an entrepreneurship mindset, then we'll begin to kind of shape the way society interacts and leverages mobile internet. Creating awareness around safety, privacy, I think is also important, especially for young people, to make sure that it's being used for good rather than the internet becoming a detractor. So, and then also making it culturally relevant for the context that we find ourselves in. If we create that access and empower people with the right training for them to know what it is that they can be able to do, I think it will create a lot more women and make them a lot more active participants in this world. You know what they say, if you change a woman's life, they change society. If you change society, we're changing our continent and our world. And I guess we have a much better connected, literate world, and we eliminate those gaps that we're seeing today.
I like that. We are changing the world and creating a much better connected and digitally literate world. So Sylvia, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And we'll be looking forward to amazing things, more amazing things from MTN Uganda. So, I'll hand over back to Dom. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Jackie and Sylvia, for sharing your thoughts. It's great to hear all that you're doing and how important it is for MTN to not leave women behind. Our speakers today have talked a lot about the need to improve handset affordability, both ensuring that there are low-cost internet-enabled devices out there, like the Jio Barrett phone that Vishaka mentioned earlier, and also handset financing, as Sylvia mentioned, where you pay for a device through an upfront deposit and then instalments over time. And it was interesting to hear how MTN are considering how to purposefully target women with handset financing through community groups and partners. Many of our speakers today also emphasised how we need to ensure women are aware of mobile internet and how it can benefit their lives and what they can do with it, and of course how to use it. And I would add that it's important that we ensure initiatives like these proactively consider reaching women as well as men. Otherwise, we are at risk of accidentally reaching mainly men. Among our speakers today has also been tentative celebration and often relief, and I include myself in that the gender gap in mobile internet has started to narrow again, but also a common feeling that we can't be complacent and we need to work together and accelerate our efforts. As Doreen said earlier, we can't declare victory because we are definitely not there yet. We need to keep the attention on the digital gender gap. So I would ask all of you listening today to keep this issue top of mind in your work and partner with others to move the needle. And then hopefully next year we'll have some more good news. Thank you all so much for listening today, and a huge thank you again to all our wonderful speakers today. So Matt, Nadia, Claire, Doreen, Gagandeep, Vishaka, Jackie and Sylvia.